Hello, and welcome back to Jane Austen On Point, historical analysis of dances from Jane Austen adaptations. I'm Cassian E. Mobley, and today is part 2 of our series on Emma. Today, I'll be looking at the two most recent versions of Emma and rating the historical accuracy of their dance scenes. As always, I'll give my opinion of the film as a whole, share one piece of snark, and then move on to the dances. Standard disclaimer that I'm not trying to ruin your favorite movie by pointing out historical inaccuracies. I'm just here to be pedantic about historical dancing, that's all. Let's begin with the BBC Miniseries of Emma from 2009. Because this is a 4-hour miniseries, they were able to include a lot of material that the theatrical releases had to cut for time. I also think they did a great job at making the story accessible to people who might not be familiar with Jane Austen's novels. I like the way they made the connection between Emma, Jane Fairfax, and Frank Churchill, all of whom are about the same age, born in the same village, and lost their mothers at a very young age. The parallel highlights how privileged Emma is, and makes Jane and Frank into more sympathetic characters. Unfortunately, I think they made Emma a little too nice in this version. She's very earnest and emotionally vulnerable, and not nearly as snobbish or manipulative as she is in the book. And while that makes her character more sympathetic, it differs greatly from the character Austen wrote. I'm also not a fan of the dialogue in this version, where they replace many of Austen's original lines with modern speech. I also don't like that they made Jane Fairfax shy and awkward instead of elegant and reserved. I just don't understand why Emma would be jealous of her in this version. I also thought a lot of Emma's dresses weren't nice enough for a woman of her rank. Emma has 30,000 pounds. That's the same as Georgiana Darcy. That's serious heiress material. She should be wearing the Regency equivalent of haute couture. My snark for this adaptation is Mr. Knightley's waistcoat collar being folded down. My husband and I are both baffled by this because stand-up collars are an iconic part of Regency menswear. It's just something we can't unsee. And I think this has to be intentional on their part because all the other guys are wearing their waistcoats properly. I don't get it. Also, look at this scene. I think he's wearing one of Mr. Bennet's waistcoats from the 95 Pride and Prejudice. No, look, here's a picture for comparison. See? At least Mr. Bennet knew how to wear his waistcoat. Ugh. The only waistcoat he seems to wear properly is this one he wears in the final scene here, which he also wears a couple other times throughout the series, and I just don't get it. Now, on to the dances. Unlike earlier adaptations, which all used real English country dances, this adaptation created their own original dances and tunes. While they managed to get a lot of things right, there are still some problems. They do an excellent job for the first two dances of making the tunes sound like they're from the Regency era. And since I just suffered through all these adaptations that used almost nothing but Baroque tunes, I really appreciate the effort. I don't really have any quibbles about either the footwork or the choreography in the first dance, both of which are period appropriate and lively. Also, I'm really happy to see a triple minor. I approve. I really like this dance. I have to be a little harder on the second dance, though. The tune is still fine, the liveliness and the footwork are still fine, but the formation is a circle, and the only circle dance from the Regency is La Boulangère, and this is definitely not La Boulangère. A few years after Jane Austen's death, dance masters started experimenting with circular form English country dances, like circular triple minors, circular duple minors, and circular four-facing four dancing. But that's not what we're seeing here. This looks like just a circle mixer, and circle mixers were definitely not a Regency thing. And if you've seen my original video, you'll remember that I've already harped on this dance for having anachronistic turn singles. In terms of instrumentation, I'm gonna give points off for using a bowron. That's not very Regency, it's more Celtic Revival 1970s / modern Irish ceilidh. I love how lively they made this dance though, with all the whooping and the howling and the clapping. We know that was going on in the Regency because dancing masters were constantly writing in their manuals that people shouldn't do that. It's just not becoming of polite society. Which tells us that they were doing it all the time. They were also telling them, like, Maybe we should be dancing these jigs and reels a little slower. So that tells me they must have been dancing them at a fairly lively tempo. The next dance is the big romantic moment between Emma and Knightley. Let's talk about the figures first, most of which are fine. They incorporate some Regency waltz figures from couples dancing. They were just starting to incorporate those kind of waltz figures into English country dancing in the 1810s, and it was still pretty controversial. So I can't really see an old-fashioned guy like Knightley doing that. In terms of formation, I have to take points off here because this is not a functional long way set because it doesn't progress. Apparently, this was due to interference on the part of the camera crew because they wanted to get better close-ups of Emma and Knightley, so they made them change the formation. I'm not going to mark them off too much, however, because the dance gives the illusion of progression through frequent casting, and unless you're paying attention to the fact that Emma and Knightley cast back to the top at the end, you may not even notice that the dance doesn't progress. But the real points off come from the music they used. Warning, serious rant ahead. Listen to this tune. They're waltzing to it, but this is not a waltz. This is a slip jig, and the thought of anyone waltzing to a slip jig makes my brain hurt. So, what's the difference between a slip jig and a waltz? I'm going to try to explain this as simply as possible because I know that some of you don't have a background in dance or music theory. It basically comes down to a difference in rhythm. A waltz has 3 beats per measure. You can think of it as saying 3 words with 1 syllable each. I like rice, I like rice, I like rice. That's what a waltz sounds like. A slip jig also has 3 beats, but each beat is divided into 3 parts. So you can think of it as a group of 3 words with 3 syllables each. Cheerily, happily, merrily, cheerily, happily, merrily, cheerily, happily, merrily. Notice how it's the same amount of beats, but it feels very different. It's a lot bouncier than I like rice, I like rice. Now, listen to the dance from Emma again. Can you hear the slip jig beat? Cheerily, happily, merrily, cheerily, happily, merrily, cheerily, happily, merrily, cheerily, happily, merrily. Both the slip jig and the waltz were popular kinds of dance music in Jane Austen's lifetime, and nobody hearing that piece of music would have thought it was a waltz. They would have heard 3 beats per measure and 3 parts per beat and danced it as a slip jig. I'm not saying it's impossible to waltz to a slip jig because they're both in triple meter. What I am saying is that in the Regency era, the waltz and the slip jig were genres of triple meter dances that had very different styling to them, so no one in the Regency hearing this tune would have waltzed to it. This is a fundamental failure because they're using the wrong type of music. Not just a fail, but an epic fail. I mean, I really don't think I can overstate how egregious this is. The bouncy, driving notes of a slip jig are not conducive to the smooth flow you need for waltzing. My overall score. It's a shame because the first dance was pretty decent. I also really appreciate the effort they put in to make the styling feel Regency accurate. They even have Mrs. Elton choose the dance tunes, which I find super impressive, even though then they go and do the stupid anachronistic simultaneous start. Then again, every other version does that too, so I can't give them too much crap for it. And at least they weren't torturing us with Baroque tunes the way most of the other ones do. But that second dance is a real mixed bag with a bogus formation. And really, playing a slip jig for a waltz is such a fundamental failure that I just can't overlook it. So, because the good parts and the bad parts in this adaptation are so extreme, I'm going to give it 2.5 dance slippers. Really wish it could be more, but I just can't with that slip jig. Sorry. I do not put myself at the front. And now for the 2020 feature film version of Emma. I went to see this movie primarily for the costumes, and they definitely did not disappoint. These are some of the most beautiful Regency costumes I've ever seen. and I really can't overemphasize how much I love them. As an adaptation, it's fairly serviceable. I didn't find it either particularly good or particularly bad. I liked that they used a lot of Austen's original dialogue, and I also liked that they included a lot of exposition for people who might not be familiar with the novel. The film establishes the romantic chemistry between Emma and Knightley at a much earlier point than the book does, but this actually lends itself well to the medium of film. Also, inasmuch as I love Bill Nye, I don't think he got the character of Mr. Woodhouse right. Mr. Woodhouse is supposed to be a helpless hypochondriac, but Nye plays him like the weird love child of Monk and Dr. House, a grumpy and controlling germaphobe. My snark has an honorable mention for the unnecessary butt cheeks, but the real winner is the nosebleed proposal. Then again, it was meant to be funny, so if you laughed and you liked it, great. It's just really not my style of humor. Way to go! You just took one of Austen's most romantic love scenes and made it a comedy. Great. So, I'm about to talk about historical inaccuracies in this adaptation, and spoilers, they get a lot of stuff wrong, so I'm gonna have to be kinda harsh on them. But keep in mind that I'm not saying that this is a bad movie just because the dances aren't historically accurate. I really like this movie, actually. I mean, I know I just said some snarky things about it, but they're kind of minor quibbles. It's really watchable, and I think it's really enjoyable. I'm also not saying that these dances aren't successful on an artistic level. I think that the people putting together this movie had a very definite vision of what they wanted the ball scene to look like, and I think they achieved it, and it looks nice. All I'm saying here is it's not historically accurate. But again, my standard disclaimer, if finding out just how historically inaccurate these dances are is going to ruin the movie for you, it's probably not a good idea to keep watching. So, let's talk about the dancing. And to start with, let's talk about that weird side point toe thingy they keep doing. Yeah, that's not a period dance step. I mean, it kind of looks like the minuet and the Scottish version of the pas de basque step had a baby, but they definitely weren't using the minuet step for English country dancing during the Regency, so fail. It's a shame because real Regency footwork was actually quite interesting. If you're interested in learning more about real Regency footwork, check out regencydances.org, which I link to right here. Also, ugh, so much Baroque music. Why? And the choreography is rubbish too. I mean, they get points for using triple minors for all the dances, but all the figures are just really weird. Take this first dance. You would never just go forward to your corner like that in the Regency. Setting to your corner, yes. Balancing to your corner, yes, but just moving straight forward, nope. Also, this back ring is just ridiculously wrong. It looks like he's escorting her someplace instead of dancing with her. And then they turn single out of it. Mrs. Elton, what are you doing here? Is this meant to be some sort of weird Allemande or a Baroque figure? It's not really recognizable in terms of any sort of historical arm hold or footwork I'm aware of. As for the dance that Harriet does with Mr. Knightley, they actually change tunes in the middle of the dance, which is very strange. I did find one article that mentions a single dancing master in London who had a style of English country dancing in multiple parts, with each part having a different meter of music. But I'm concluding that they never became popular because it was only an incidental mention in one article, and I've never seen any other article or primary sources that talk about them. Unfortunately, I don't know what primary sources the author of this article was using. I don't really have a lot of complaints about the choreography in this one, but the first tune they play sounds really anachronistically Baroque, and I don't know what to think about them changing tunes in the middle like that. Also, Mrs. Elton, why are you shimmying? I mean, I know you already have that anachronistic 1830s hairstyle, but why are you using dance moves from the 1960s? I have less gripes about the dance Emma does with Mr. Knightley, but I still don't like it. The tune itself is period correct. The choreography is mostly okay, except for the weird handhold on the stars and the clapping. I've never seen clapping in a waltz. Clapping is for more lively dances like jigs and reels. Also, I just hate these Romeo and Juliet handholds. I blame Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet for making everybody think that historical dancing had handholds like this, but it's completely ahistorical and definitely wasn't used in the Regency.
I've been thinking a lot about why the styling on this dance feels so off to me, and I realized that it looks very stiff and lifeless, and this has nothing to do with the moderate tempo. A lot of the styling is meant to give the impression of stateliness and dignity. It's as if the dancing is supposed to be a metaphor for a highly structured and dignified society where everyone knows their place and does their duty and never shows any feeling. You don't get a sense of that beautiful flowing motion I associate with the waltz, and it doesn't really look like anyone is having fun. In fact, in all the dances in this movie, whenever they use a slow tempo, the dancing just feels dead and joyless. And whenever they try to inject some fun, it's stupid stuff like Mrs. Elton doing the shimmy. So yeah, I really don't like this.
My overall take for these dances is not great. Really, the only nice things I can say about it is they used one Regency waltz tune, and they used a triple minor formation throughout. And alright, the last dance had some decently styled Regency figures in it. I pretty much hate everything else about it, and the styling makes it almost unwatchable. I tend to be more lenient on older adaptations because the research into what Regency dancing looked like just wasn't as good back then. But now everybody knows a lot more details, and it's so easy to access it even online. I mean, there's really not a lot of excuse not to get it right. And clearly, you can see from some details that they did include that these people did their research and they chose not to style it in a proper Regency fashion for certain things. And that's really galling. Especially since I think I see what kind of artistic statement they were trying to make by changing things. And I'm of the opinion that if they had done proper Regency footwork and music, they could have achieved that same sort of artistic effect and still made it period appropriate. So I don't think that this was a case of either or. This was definitely a case where they could have done both, but they didn't. So, unfortunately, I have to give this adaptation only 2 out of 5 dance slippers. There are a lot of great things to admire about this adaptation, but dancing is not one of them. So that's my take on the dances from all 5 versions of Emma. In our next installment of Jane Austen on Point, we'll be covering Pride and Prejudice. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share us with your friends. We're a brand new channel, and we could really use the extra support. Thank you, and have an ostentatiously good day.